Hello, hello, and welcome to Tea with Halo, the podcast of the Enchanted Academy, where we learn about magic, explore magic, and not just magic as in doing stuff, as in doing spells and things, but the magic that is in the world. This is all about re enchanting our lives, re enchanting the worlds that we live in, and really remembering that the world is already enchanted. I am your host, Halo Quinn. I am an author, a storyteller, a witch, and I teach magic. And of course, because of that, I've been learning about all of these different pieces for a very long time. And so I thought it would be lovely to have people on who have also been learning and teaching through their writings or their classes about all of these different pieces so we can get into conversations about how you can engage in that process of expanding your understanding and connection and exploring how to bring a bit more enchantment and magic into your lives. So today we have the wonderful Thea who has joined us. So this is Tea with Halo and Thea. Thea, would you like to introduce yourself for our listeners, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, my name's Thea, and my book, A Guide to Pilgrimage, was published in October last year by Moon Books. It's a uh, it's a guide for people who don't necessarily follow traditional Christian principles or Christian or world religions. And it's to encourage people to try pilgrimage as a way of spiritual growth and connection with nature, the world around us, and the divine in whatever form you believe the divine is. Pilgrimage is an ancient practice with written records that go back all about 3,000 years, but it's probably a much older practice than that. And it's just as relevant as it was then to us today. I travel a lot in connection with the elemental places that I like to walk where I connect with nature and the divine. I'm a heathen. I will primarily practice that solo. And I also study all things Norse, like runes, the Norse society, Vikings, and Old Norse language at university. And as an aside, I write ghost and folk horror stories as well.
Oh, how wonderful. So, pilgrimage is something that the idea of it has always fascinated me. And I have always sort of thought, I really should take some time to go to some of these sacred places and go on a pilgrimage because it sounds like a wonderful thing. But I'm aware that for a lot of our listeners, they may not actually know necessarily what pilgrimage is. So, would you be able to talk to us a little bit about what pilgrimage is and what makes it pilgrimage rather than just visiting somewhere?
Yeah, sure. Well, pilgrimage has been about, as I said, for over 3,000 years, probably longer. I think it's really incredible that people have actually always sought the sacred in the landscape. One really good example of that is Blickmead, which is near Stonehenge, which is a magical sheltered bend on the River Avon. And there's archaeological evidence that goes all the way back to the Mesolithic, which is roughly between 8 and 12,000 years. So for all that time, people have been going to Blickmead on the River Avon for that length of time. And the people who lived in the Mesolithic were largely hunter-gatherers, but every time they went back to this place, and they've been doing it for generations and generations, and that just seems incredible to me. And in the Middle Ages, obviously, most people know about the pilgrimage from the Middle Ages, which was the Christian pilgrimage, and it was the number one thing for people to do to show their devotion to the Christian God. And amazingly, 1 in 3 people at that time went on pilgrimage or had a family member who went on pilgrimage. And from that legacy, we've got some amazing pilgrimage ways that are marked. These are ways that are marked and signposted and documented, so they're easier to follow. And they're all around the country and also all over the world, including the most famous one, which is probably the Camino de Santiago. And over 47,000 people do that every year. Um, And I think today people still find pilgrimage relevant, but I think there's always been this gap in the market for pagans. How do pagans fit pilgrimage into their belief system when pilgrimage has always been shown as being this really Christian way of doing things or other mainstream religions? Um, whereas it can be adapted and changed to however you want it. A pilgrimage is a linear journey that takes you from one place to another place, whether this place is an established sacred site or whether it's somewhere specifically important to you. It could be something related to your family that you want to go and visit. Um, and today, how many people have got 3 or 4 months to go on a pilgrimage? Not many, I don't think. So um, we have to adapt it. We have to make it so that everybody can do it. And if walking isn't possible for everybody, so it's important to show that you don't have to walk. You can go in other ways. You could go in a van, you could go on a bus, you could even fly to places. The intention and the connection is the important thing about a pilgrimage.
So you mentioned that pilgrimage is a way of showing devotion.
Mm-hmm.
So in a pagan context, I hear that as being devotion to, like, for many pagans, it's the divine is in nature. So it's that devotion to nature. And also, many of us have our own deities and gods and relationships to the folk stories and folk practices
Yeah.
of different places. So, does that, how is that expressed through a pilgrimage for you? How would you suggest that people start exploring that concept of devotion through a journey from point A to point B?
Mm-hmm. I think the best way to find devotion through journey is to find the place that you want to go to. So if the place is connected with a deity, for example, if it was a Christian pilgrimage, it would possibly be connected to a cathedral or a church or a shrine of some sort. If it's perhaps a pagan belief that you've got, then perhaps it's connected to a sacred site such as Stonehenge or some other place like that, maybe West Kennet Longborough. Um, so maybe you could consider doing a pilgrimage to those places rather than the more traditional places. Um, and also as I said, you don't have to walk to them. You can go in other ways. It's the intention of getting there and what you want to get out of it that's most important.
So while people are looking for those places that hold those sorts of meanings, what are good ways of finding locations to take a pilgrimage to?
Well, I mean, look within yourself and see what comes up. If you follow a specific type of belief system, then look for things related to that, or maybe even just do a search online, find somewhere that inspires you, read up about it, see if that's a place you might want to go to pilgrimage to on a pilgrimage to. You could even have a selection of a few, or maybe your belief systems such as Druidry. I know they have specific places they like to go to, such as Glastonbury. There's Callanish in the Outer Hebrides, and there's Orkney as well. So you could look at these places and consider going on pilgrimage to them, and then have a selection, and then maybe meditate on them, go on a journey from within yourself and see which one is the one that draws you to it, because I think that's the key. It must be something that you want to do, and a place that draws you to it is the place you need to go on a pilgrimage to.
Does it have to be somewhere that is like really famous and everyone knows about, like Glastonbury or Stonehenge?
No, I don't think so. I think you could go on a pilgrimage to someone that's really personal to you. For example, um, maybe there's a particular tree that you love that's in the landscape near you, or you've seen, maybe if you've been out, maybe you could go on a pilgrimage to that, build up a relationship with the tree, and learn more about the tree itself. Or maybe it's a forest that you like to visit, that you find sacred when you sit within it. That would be a good place to go on a pilgrimage. Or it could be something really deeply personal, perhaps. It's connected to your ancestry, somewhere your family comes from. Maybe you want to go on pilgrimage to visit those places, the places where they come from, and find a connection to that, to your family, to your ancestors there, and to the divine there.
Mm. How much do you find that learning about and researching about the place, the location itself, if there is research like, say it's somewhere like Stonehenge, like learning some of the archaeology about it, or um, if it's somewhere that your family came from, learning more about the family history, or if it's somewhere that is just personal, like a tree, learning about the tree itself and that species in that location? How much do you find that learning about those things intellectually helps or hinders, or when you're actually trying to make those connections?
I think learning is always a good thing. The more you learn, the better it is for you to be an informed person. But to learn about a place, or say, for example, Stonehenge, if you read all the books on Stonehenge, you're going to get hundreds of different opinions about Stonehenge, why it was put there, who put it there, all sorts of things you'll find. But you have to discern which thing you believe, if you believe any of them, and then make your own mind up about why you would want to go there. And the connection you make with Stonehenge needs to be personal, needs to be your connection, not anybody else's connection. The other things you read might help you be informed about the connection you want to make, but ultimately it's your own personal connection that's important.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you on that entirely. So when you're actually, I want to ask you a little bit of a personal question. What's
Sure.
your favorite pilgrimage that you have ever been on and why?
Oh gosh. The pilgrimage I write about in my book is probably my favourite pilgrimage, which is when I went to Iona in Scotland. Um, that's because I was called to Iona since I was a teenager. I dreamt about it before I went there. I didn't know that's where it was. I didn't know why I dreamt about it. I just thought perhaps, dreams, you come up with all sorts of strange things in your dreams. But the dream returned in at regular intervals through my life until I saw a TV program with Iona on it, and I knew it was that place. I recognized parts of it. Something in me just felt that was the place I had to go to. So um, when I found it, I read up about it. I researched how to get there, how I was going to get there, how much time I had, which is always everything these days is always time constrained, isn't it? So it was trying to fit everything in. Iona's, although it's quite nearby geographically, it's actually quite a hard place to get to. So it's working out the best ways to go, coming up with plans, coming up with backup plans, deciding what you want to do when you're there, whether you want to immerse in nature, if there's specific places that you want to go to. For example, you go down to St Columba's Bay, where St Columba landed in Scotland from Ireland and brought Christianity to Scotland. Um, and on the beach there, you find greenstones, which are called Iona greenstone. It's quite a famous stone, and it's a connection with the beach. And although I'm not a Christian, I could kind of understand how amazing it would have been to land on that beach after days out at sea, find somewhere that gave you shelter and realize that that was the place you needed to go to. Iona's a very liminal place, I think. It's very much between here and the other world, if the other world is what you believe in. So there's different parts of Iona that are very magical.
That sounds gorgeous. I love the idea of just these green stones on the beach.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful place down south from where I am in Wales where it's near St. David's. And
Mhm.
uh, when we went to, me and a couple of friends went to visit it, and we were going to St. David's and St. Non's. Because, of course, as you say, like, I'm not Christian, but those figures, those beings, those people are, I mean, they're mighty dead, right? Those saints are mighty dead, and they have that connection to the landscape. They speak of something, of a part of our history and a part of the place. So we were going to these places, and we went down like a little windy path down to a beach that had these cliffs that held it. So it was this quite a small cove, but the cliffs were pink and purple, and the sand was pink and purple and sandy colored. Well, so it was just this, we were just held in this kind of pink and purple stone, just soft glow. And it was like being held by a beautiful sunset with the waves lapping. It was gorgeous.
Mm.
And that was almost a chance encounter. We'd gone for this journey down there to visit these places, to tune into the landscape, and we'd stumbled across this beautiful place. And that moment has stayed with me for, it's been 10 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps that's your place.
One place, certainly. One place of
Yes.
many. Yeah.
Then, I mean, there could be more than one. You don't have to have one place you go, but um, a place that is kind of your heart place.
Mm. Yeah, maybe I should go back and see if it still sings to me in the same way. It was the first place I saw a seal and heard the song of the sea as well, was there. It's down
Wow.
Pembrokeshire way. It was, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very magical. So that,
Yeah.
yeah. So that like piece where all of these things kind of weave together, perhaps we can follow that journey back a little bit for you. And I'd love to hear about when you began your journey into working with pilgrimage and
Hmm.
exploring how to translate the material that you had that was very Christian into a more pagan context, which I find the lines are a little blurrier than we think they are.
Yeah, I mean, archaeological evidence shows that quite a lot of pilgrimage sites were actually originally, or pilgrimage sites, sorry, Christian sites were originally pagan sites that were built on by Christians. I've spent quite a lot of time going around looking at St. Michael churches, which were often built on the top of ancient burial sites or ancient stones and things like that. And it's quite interesting to find how many of them actually were originally something other than what they are now. And I think the Christians were very good at finding the places people congregated, the places people worshipped, and making them their own. I think the Romans also did that sort of thing as well. So it's quite an interesting subject if you go into it and look for these things. I think pilgrimage, I think I've always done it since I was a child. I think when I was younger, I used to go out and find places in nature that made me feel a whole person.
Mm.
Whereas when you're a teenager, everything is fills you with angst, your family, school, everything. And I think going out in nature helped me find myself. And I remember when I was a teenager finding walking along the beach, which is not a particularly fantastic beach down here, it's quite an industrial place. I used to walk along the beach and find tiny shells and tiny pieces of glass that had been smoothed by the sea. And I used to put them in little alcoves where birds used to go. And I used to find bird feathers and make little shrines or altars along the beach. And I think that was my start on looking for pilgrimage. And ever since then, I've done something like it. Walking, I've always found very helpful mentally. I think walking is very good for you. Um, if I'm feeling anxious, I go out for a walk, and I find the rhythm of walking, the to in and fro in, really helps sort of calm your mind, which is another way of looking at pilgrimage as a way of clearing your head, of going out and being at peace with yourself, I think, along with finding the divine.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. If on the days that I am mobile, going out for a walk
Yeah.
is like, and because I
Yeah.
live by the sea, so I'll walk along that
Yeah.
seafront, and it just, that connection with that space and that natural wild space that is, yeah, makes a big
Yeah.
difference.
Mm.
So So what about when, like obviously here in the UK, at the point where we're recording this conversation, we're in the cold part of February. We've just gotten past Emok. We've just got like the days are getting longer, but it's bitterly cold. We've got a storm rolling in where I am now, and sometimes it's actually kind of sometimes often it's uncomfortable to go out pilgrimaging in the winter, but sometimes it's actually quite dangerous because of the winds and the storms and
Yeah.
things. So, and of course, physical mobility issues and various things, as you said,
Yes.
you can pilgrimage in ways that aren't walking. But what happens? What's a good way of including pilgrimage and those things in our practice, in our lives, in those times when we can't get out, when we can't go to the places physically for whatever reason?
You can connect to places within yourself. You don't have to go out to pilgrimage. If you can focus your mind on the place, if there's a specific place you want to go to, if you can focus your mind on that, you don't have to leave your house to do that. You can do it in your head. And you'll be surprised at how clear your mind can be when it wants to go to a certain place. Definitely. And I've been thinking a lot about this over the last few months because I do this practice called Utisetta, which is I sit outside. Um, and I do this in the winter. I don't really do it in the summer because I like to sit out in the dark. Although it's cold, you can just wrap up. You can go outside. At midwinter, I sat outside all night. And at the time, I had particular things I wanted to know. So I sat myself down, lit a small fire to keep a bit warm, had a drink of water to try and keep hydrated. I sat outside and I talked to the land, and the land talks back to you. I find the land talks back to you. And in that time where you're kind of sleep deprived, I think it is a way of building a bridge to other places. So I can go to other places, even though I'm not physically going there, I'm going there in my mind, and I can visit places perhaps that aren't necessarily of this earth. Maybe they're in the other world or other places. I think it's a good way of connecting in a different way with pilgrimage because it is a pilgrimage to a different place. It's going from one place to another, which I think is the remit of a pilgrimage. So another thing I've also done is the year walk, which is a Swedish form of divination. So I did it at the new year. So just before dawn, I went out for a walk, and without eating, without looking at the specific things like you shouldn't eat or drink, you shouldn't look at a lighted fire, and you should walk far enough so you can't hear a cock crow, which is quite easy where I live because I live in a city. So and I went out and looked for signs in nature for the coming year. In my mind, I had these ideas that I wanted to know. Like I wanted to know whether I'd be successful at certain things. And I found things within nature, such as I found a stone that looked like a raven, and I found a path that I didn't know existed, which kind of gave me clues to how the year would be. Which is although it's not a pilgrimage because I wasn't going to a specific place, I found certain meanings in it, which I think could sort of loosely be called a pilgrimage in a way. So I did those two practices during the winter. Mainly I like to just really focus on where I'd like to go in my head, perhaps. So if I want to go to a specific place, I might do it in a journey. If especially as I know the places that I want to go to. So I might have, for example, if I wanted to go to Iona, I've got a piece of greenstone that I can hold that connects me with it. And then it helps me project myself to those places that I can do in the winter. So all these things you don't have to really go very far to do. You could literally sit outside, or you could literally sit inside and open your window and smell the air, perhaps connect a little bit. So that these are all accessible things to do in the winter, especially when it's cold.
Yes. Or like, as I say, the sea is just there. So when we've got the storms and sometimes the waves are coming over the road and hitting my front door, and I physically
Right.
cannot leave the
Yeah.
house safely without getting swept into the sea. Doesn't happen very often, but once every couple of years. And I'm like, I am not going outside in that. But there is still, as you say, that space to sit. I'd like to, if I'm going to do that, turn off the electronic lights and the computer
Yeah, yeah.
sounds, and yeah, and have the like that space to really get that kind of peace. And
Mm,
I love that holding a pebble or a piece that's from those
mm,
places. Um, so obviously, one of the threads that is really important to me in my practice is the stories and the storytelling. So
hmm.
in Wales, we have a Mabinogi, and we have those stories are, and many of the folktales are rooted in specific places in the
Yeah.
landscape. So you can go to those physical places. But I've also
Mm,
found that similarly to what you're talking about, we can read those stories or tell those stories
yeah.
to ourselves and go on that journey through the stories and begin to develop a connection that way to the mythic
Mm,
landscape.
yeah.
Is that something that you bring in when you're going out into the physical places as well?
Yes, definitely. I'll read a lot of folk tales, folk stories, stories related to specific places. For example, going back to Iona again, I read quite a few pieces of writing about Iona, including one of my favorite authors is Robert Louis Stevenson, who although I believe he probably did go to Iona. He didn't actually write about it specifically, but he did write about one of his characters in his book, Kidnapped, who looked across from this little tiny island where he was shipwrecked and saw the lights on Iona. So I've looked around for different ways of seeing Iona from different people's perspectives, including folk stories. And the story, obviously, the most famous one is for St. Columba, who went to Iona and set up the abbey and brought Christianity to Scotland. But also, there's other stories that are Scottish stories about creatures that live in the sea and all sorts of things that you would look for in the landscape. For example, most famously, obviously, is the Loch Ness Monster. Probably my Scottish friends probably wish I didn't bring that up. But if you were going to go up Loch Ness, you might well read the stories about the Loch Ness monster, or you might read other stories from the locations around it. I think it's really important to read story and landscape together because they're entwined completely.
Absolutely. I also love that you bring in the Utisetta, because I remember learning that at a certain point in history, uh, sitting in places for too long, in because it's an Icelandic practice, isn't it? So in I or
Yeah,
that
Norway. Yeah,
yeah, and so in Iceland, sitting in those places that were known to be where people sat for Utisetta, it got banned because they're like, well, you
yeah,
shouldn't be doing this, you should be being Christian.
yeah,
So the
yeah,
people then started to walk instead and do
yeah,
sitting out while moving.
yeah, yeah,
So I love
yeah.
that connection between them.
Yeah, I think they work so well together, don't they? Walking, sitting out, just being out, doing these things. Yeah, that I think Utisetta got banned in most Scandinavian countries as well as Iceland
Mm,
because it was one of the pagan practices that the Christians couldn't stamp out easily, so they had to bring in laws to get rid of it,
yeah,
along with many other things.
yeah. It's really interesting that piece about that line between Christianity and paganism, and where you've got those
Mm,
places where actually the Christianity came quite late, whereas here the when Christianity came to Britain and these areas, we ended up with quite a melding. And so we had to, for a long time, it was what we describe now as Celtic Christianity, where
mm,
actually a lot of the practices of the landscape started to sort of weave together, and those stories became part of the whole. And it was more of a gradual process. Um,
mm,
and I always come back to that thing about, it's like what you're talking about, that connecting into the landscape. When we are
Mm.
human in the landscape, we relate to it in certain ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's so when people come over, even if they've got quite a, because Christianity grew up in the Middle East, right? That's a very different landscape. So when it comes over here, of course, it's going to adapt somewhat and meld somewhat, and we end up with this slightly different
Yeah.
flavor.
Mm.
So what's a if someone is looking to start pilgrimage, so sometimes I'll ask people like, what did you wish you knew when you were first starting out?
Mm.
It's also a what would you advice would you give to someone who's just starting out, given that you said you've always done it? So
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked about it quite a lot in my book, but I think the thing I wish I'd known about not just pilgrimage but paganism and my belief system is I wish I trusted myself and wished I trusted my intuition and not listened so much to what other people told me about it. So I think it's really important that you believe if you're pulled somewhere or if you believe a certain thing, trust your instincts because you know what's right for you ultimately. I think it's just something everybody does. And you should always take note, even if you don't follow it, you should always take note of what you think and what you believe and what's instinctual to you. Definitely. I wish I'd known that when I was a child.
yeah, it's that thing, isn't it? We're taught to ignore those instincts, we're taught to ignore those intuitions in favor of behaving ourselves or doing what we're told or
Yeah.
bowing to authority. And so
Mm.
it can get really difficult to trust those instincts and those intuitions. So I like that you say, even if you don't listen to it, write it down, because over
Yeah,
time doing that, you start to actually pay attention, and then you start to notice, oh, maybe I can trust
yeah,
myself.
yeah,
Do you have
definitely.
do you have
Sorry.
any other ways that people might be able to sort of start to cultivate that ability to trust themselves and that intuition?
I think a lot of it has got to do with um if you feel it's right, if you feel what you know within you is right, then trusting that. I know it's difficult, but you just have to try it. You just have to try and trust yourself. Um, and also, it's very good if, for example, you join a group of other pagans, perhaps in your particular type of paganry. If you join a group, you might well find that other people tell you the same thing, that you should always trust what your instincts tell you.
Mm,
I mean, if you went out to somewhere dangerous, you'd know it was dangerous and you wouldn't do it. So similarly, if you go somewhere and you feel it's right, then you should believe that it is right for you.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. And it's one of those pieces that often I was when I was training and learning about things, my I was very lucky that my teachers were had an emphasis on discernment. And it's like coming into how do you discern what feels right inside rather than what your mind is telling you you should
Yeah.
be doing, and like learning that and becoming into that trust. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So on that note of joining a group and listening to others, and coming into that space where you're sort of supporting each other, I always find that magical community is really important, and pagan community is really important. People with those similar touch points, particularly because we are a minority in
Yeah.
Britain, in America, where most of my listeners will be. Um, so what for you is a good way of finding, or if you're already a part of strengthening those communities and supporting those communities?
I think a lot of it is, first of all, you need to know yourself what you want from a community. I think if you know what you want from a community, it's easier to find that outside of yourself. So, for example, if your most of your belief system is Druid, then you can go and look at the main Druid groups like OBOD, and there's the BDO as well, and there's American groups, and you can go and look at them. You can go on their websites, see if you agree with what they've got written there. I know that OBOD has got an amazing website. They've got loads of information, and they've got quite a lot of stories and lots of things that you can find out. If you believe that is right for you, then maybe talk to them. If you find another one, then go and talk to them. If you find them they're more accurately how you feel about the world and how you feel about your spirituality, then maybe um go on their website and talk to them, maybe try and find some local group and join that. Um, I think it's more difficult to going on to heathenry. I think it's more difficult with heathenry because there's not so many groups of that. Um, so I think quite a lot of people do practice solo, which I think it's got its good points because you can do whatever you like, but at the same sometimes it's nice to just chat to people about your belief system. So I think it's really important to try, if there isn't a group, is to maybe try and find a couple of other people who share your views, at least somewhat, and then perhaps try and start your own group up. I know that I found a couple of people who are also heathen who live locally, and now we're trying to form a little kindred. So that's quite nice as well. So we've got our own little group that we formed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's always, I think, unless you really don't want to work with other people, I think you can always find somebody. And the brilliance of the internet means it makes it much easier to find people, which I know that's a bit counterproductive when you want to get away from it and go into nature. But as a starting point, things like the internet are fantastic, and local groups.
Mm.
Just look at, I mean, in the old days, you used to go down the library and you see a big board and it would say about all the different groups that meet up and all the clubs. And these days, you can just go and switch on your computer and find the same thing, which is brilliant, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I quite like that the so you can go to the more general moots and sort of social spaces where it's a bit more mixed as well to find other people who are on a wavelength. But I love what you say about have an idea when you're starting if you want to join a group of what actually is an alignment with you. So that
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, when you're looking, you can again
yeah,
discern, recognize where are you going to be most at home. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
thank you.
I
Um,
mean, sometimes it's worth trying out different groups. Maybe try one, see if you like it. If you don't, leave, find another group.
yeah, yeah, and it's really important to be able to connect with other people that have those shared beliefs, those shared connections, those shared worldviews. And
Mm.
I think we inspire each other as well. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it also, even if you don't always agree with everything somebody says, it's always nice to have a different opinion to your own opinion about different things, spirituality, gods, or anything. It's just nice to sort of bounce ideas off people as well. Especially if you develop a very good relationship, then you can run ideas past people, come up with different rituals, perhaps, if that's what you want to do, and create your own little community. It's always a good thing.
yeah, oh, absolutely. So as we're sort of coming towards the end of our time, a little bit, what I like to do is to ask my guests to share something practical that people can do, um, so that you can apply some of the inspiration from today and from our conversation, so that that can actually inspire people to engage with
Mm.
whatever it is, rather than just take it in as interesting information and then forgetting about it 5 minutes later, which is what I do as someone who loves learning. So I asked you before we started if you had something practical that you'd like to share.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, sure.
what would you recommend?
I think perhaps going outside into nature if you can, go outside into nature and observe the world around you. Maybe if you can't go outside, perhaps meditate within yourself on looking at a place that you perhaps would like to go, or perhaps just on a forest walk you could meditate upon. Spend some time thinking about your senses. You could think about how it might sound outside on a spring morning. You could think about how the sun would feel upon your face, and you could smell the flowers, you could smell the grass, all the things that help you connect with nature. If you're able to, you could go for a walk. It doesn't have to be a pilgrimage walk of many miles. It could just be a walk outside. Try a mindful walk, which means you pay attention and you're present where you walk. So you see everything. So you listen to the sound of your shoes on the path. You listen to the water, perhaps if you're by a lake, or you might hear bird song. You might hear people walking past you. You just are present within the moment you're walking. I think it's really important to develop a way of connecting in that way. Make sure you breathe deeply. And if you want to take it further, you could maybe visit a place that's quite local to you that's meaningful, such as maybe a sacred site or a tree, or maybe there's a piece of river that you like nearby, or maybe the sea, or go to a beach and try and connect with the energies of the place that you visit. If you journal, you could write about your experiences afterwards, write about how it made you feel, write about what you saw. You could write poetry, you could make a piece of art, perhaps. And if it feels right to you, then you could meditate on pilgrimage itself and see what comes to you. See if you feel called to somewhere, perhaps somewhere that you've not been, and perhaps somewhere that's not that local to you. And then take it from there. I mean, there's plenty of advice on the internet about pilgrimage. And there's also my book, which gives you loads of advice about pilgrimage.
It does indeed. So, what is the name of your book and where can they find it?
My book's called A Guide for Pilgrimage, which is published. I've got it here. If you can you see it? There it is. Ooh, there it is. A Guide for Pilgrimage. It's published by Moon Books, and you can find it in any online bookseller, or you can order it from any bookshop. And the other place you can find me is on my blog, which is heathenpilgrimsubstack.com. All my content's free, so you can read as much of it as you want or not read any of it.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me here today and for sharing about those experiences around pilgrimage and around that space. There's lots of really juicy, interesting thoughts, but not in the, I don't mean that in the like getting lost in your head kind of way, but in the, oh, how can I really bring this into being present with the landscape, being present with those spaces? So I really appreciate that move towards presence. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So I, yeah, thank you to Thea for being a guest with me here today. Absolute delight. And thank you to our listeners. So remember to take a little bit of time to either step outside and go for a walk where you're being mindful and aware, and then writing and arting about it afterwards and reflecting on it afterwards, or meditating on that space, that place that you would like to go, and visiting it in your mind and your spirit, and experience how that feels and see about what the next steps on pilgrimage are. So remember to actually go and do these things rather than turning off the episode and forgetting about it immediately to go back into the busyness of everyday life. This is as much a reminder to myself as it is to anyone else. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. If you have enjoyed this, then like, subscribe, share, hit all of the buttons. You know the drill. You've been on the internet before. And do share this conversation with a friend who you feel might benefit from it, might enjoy it, might like to go on a pilgrimage with you. I am Halo Quinn. This has been Thea. We have been talking about pilgrimage. And all of the links and information will be in the description. So share with us in the comments how your inner or outer mini pilgrimage goes, because we'd love to hear from you. You can also come and join the community at the Enchanted Academy. It's a free community where we talk about magic, enchantment, and all the things that are related to it, paganism. And you would be very welcome. Again, find the link below. And until next time, may your path be enchanted. May your pilgrimages be delightful. May your beaches be beautiful colours. And may your life be filled with beauty, joy, delight, and healing. Thank you.